You are watching the Jennylyn Show, and I'm Jennylyn Gleave, your host. And as usual, I have a very handsome gentleman or a beautiful woman sitting with me on the set. And tonight, that gentleman happens to be Mark Whelan. Mark is British, and he lives here in the United States, and he's going to tell us what he's been doing while he's been living here. Mark, thanks for taking the time to come on my show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, tell us, what does Mark Whelan do in the U.S.?
So my company is called Human Centered Leaders, and I'm this founder. I'm also executive coach. What we do is we offer on-demand coaching, and we coach 3 specific areas: performance, productivity, but perhaps more importantly, considering we're in this kind of current climate where there's a lot of cynicism and not so much optimism, we also coach on purpose.
So how did you get started? I mean, you say you're an independent company, right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
So how did you come to the U.S. and start doing this? And do we have a shortage of this type of expertise in the U.S., I must ask?
So it came about, I was involved in the startup world as a product manager for a long time. And then I got to a certain point in a runway in my career where I thought, okay, I want to do something bigger than just working on projects for financial returns. And then my brother and I had a conversation. We were talking about my grandfather. And my grandfather had set up an institute in the United Kingdom, which then went around all the world. And the institute was called the Institute of Management. And that's a multinational. And I said, you know, maybe I should do something more in line with what my grandfather was doing, which was to, you know, basically help and serve other people rather than just my own ends. And that's why I came. You know, after some success in Silicon Valley, then I decided that I wanted to offer, you know, service and do something that I would be proud of and look back on, you know, in my old age and hopefully say I did my bit.
Remarkable.
Thank you.
So tell me, is it difficult to start an independent operation like this in the Valley where it appears there are lots of people doing what you're offering? Well,
yes and no. I would say you've got, it's not just the Valley that offer this kind of coaching. You've obviously got some very well-known names within the industry that advertise themselves and their ego, and they're...
Of course.
No names mentioned.
Never separate the two.
But, you know, they'll charge you a very large amount of money to bring people in and offer them that their workshops will offer them some confidence, and then they'll leave their shows or workshops feeling pretty hyped about what they're doing, and then they have to pay another 6 to 10 grand the next time they go, and you know, they go through it. But I looked at this industry and I thought, you know, some of this lacks integrity, and that's why I focused on the human-centered approach, because I thought this is the area that's missing in this industry, and this is something that I thought, well, this gives me an advantage. It gives me something that A, I believe in, and B, I'm seeing, you know, is missing here.
Were you able to zero in on that because of your involvement with the startup culture?
I just felt like there was just a natural inclination from, you know, the millennial community is not the right word, but from younger people. And I also found that from intergenerational, it just got to the point where I was talking to people, they were doing their job, they were working long hours and they felt dissatisfied, and, you know, they were going from one company to the next, and they were, you know, often you'll find that people will say, I'm kind of dissatisfied, or I'm lonely, or I work really long hours, I don't get a chance to see my family, or my family's a long way away in a different country, and I'd like more out of my life than just this. So
what type of a clientele do you target? Do you go to big corporations, smaller companies?
C-suite. Okay. C-suite for big companies. And I've also done some, well, various institutions, so with big gov, and I recently was, I chaired a session at Stanford called A Vision for the Future, Human-Centered Leaders, which was, that was part of the Marshall Scholarships Foundation. So we had people from probably the top percentage of Oxford University, Cambridge, MIT, Harvard and Stanford, and then I end up coaching a session there on
wow,
like what future of leadership.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And what kind of leaderships, what kind of leaders we all would want to see, and not just in the corporate world, but also perhaps beyond that as well.
Is the British government giving you any type of support? How do you get?
Yes, I do get some support from the UK Gov. I'm part of a group which the ambassador put together, so I do have support from the UK, both in San Francisco and back from London. But it's not it's not about being just British. It's about, like I said, leading from a human point of view. So anyone, and it doesn't really matter where they're from. It's not an exclusive.
Or the color
elite.
of their skin.
Absolutely. Or what gender they are.
Like me, you still help them.
Yeah, exactly. Or, it's not gender specific
Right.
or age specific,
Right.
or because we see all these kind of hidden, the sort of invisible walls, right? And I decided that from my standpoint, from my company, would be, no, we do away with that. Mm-hmm. We don't start from that. We come from a human-centered approach. And I feel like that's the right thing, and in this period of history, it's really important.
So how long have you been doing it?
Company's been around for 2 years now.
Okay, and how would you rate your success on a scale from 1 to 10 within the 2 years that you've been in operation?
I'd say very successful, and the likelihood of continuing the way I'm going, but there's a lot more work to be done. A lot more work to be done.
And what is the one thing that stands out when you go to these different companies that you coach? What's a common thread that you see?
Actually, the irony is there isn't a common thread.
There isn't?
I would say that each company is almost like a microcosm. It has its own miniature culture. And each cultural environment, each sort of large company has its own, it's like its own culture. It's got its own identity. And some of the technology companies, obviously I won't mention their names, but some are very geared towards being highly competitive, and the environment is designed to set employees against one another. And then others which are more collaborative, and they see that they want to improve the environment and be more inclusive and have cross-functional teams and of different ethnicities and also different backgrounds, and they're encouraging that. It's just like it's a very wide range. So I'd say they're almost like miniature countries in a way, if you think of it like that. Mm-hmm.
I've never understood companies that set their employees up to compete against each other. What do you think is the reason behind that? Is it their way of I can't think of the word I want to say, of like motivating them? Is this a way of trying to motivate the staff? The companies that do that? Because I think I've been in a few companies with that type of culture, and I found it to accomplish the complete opposite. That's why I'd like your perspective on why you think it's done.
So I would advocate, I wouldn't advocate, but I think, well, from my experience, the justification for it is we get maximum return over the shortest period of time. So from the board level, the idea is we just want to make sure our quarterly is the highest possible. The downside of that is it can be human capital is an expense. Mm-hmm. So in sales teams, they're driven to the point of despair, to the point of stabbing each other in the back.
Absolutely.
And you see, and also you see departments which some managers thrive from having departments against one another. So engineers can say, "Hey, sales, you don't know what you're talking about," and marketing can the engineers can say to the marketing, "Well, we don't really need you anyway, so we're not going to talk to you." And if these environments are set up like very divisive environments, and some companies are designed like that, it might be good for the manager because it gives them sort of authority, but for the people within the teams, it just might mean their shelf life might be a little bit shorter, and there's a burnout period after, say, 18 months, 2 years. They want to give up, and they want to move somewhere else.
Right, and that's exactly what happens. So what do you do when you go into a company and you notice that that's the culture? What advice do you normally give to companies like that?
I wouldn't really give them advice. from companies that I see, when I see these kind of environments and I see the cost on human capital, I look at it from a business case, because essentially they want to understand from a business case. And for the business case, I would say, you know, like, what's your turnover? How many employees are you getting through? Are you having to constantly rehire? It's very expensive and time consuming to keep rehiring.
And companies seem like they're oblivious to that fact. Like, every time you hire a new employee, it's costing your company money.
Yeah.
So why not hire better people, or manage and strategically place the people you hire? I would say, from my observation, a lot of companies hire great people, but they're not strategically positioned. So the company is not getting the best out of that person.
Right, yes.
What do you think? How would you help a company that's investing in you with that? Do you just ignore it because that's not what you do, or do you gently suggest?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
When you've gone into a company where you notice that that's the culture, if they're just bringing you in to coach, but you notice that happening, do you address it or just ignore it because that's not what you're hired for?
It depends upon the circumstances, it really does. What I'll look at is, I'll look at as a business case, and I'll say, look, from a human case, I'll say, like, this is what I see, and this is what the evidence is, and we'll talk to the people within the team and find out what their feedback is. And sometimes what employees think and experience might be different from what the manager will say, or their team lead, or the director will have to say about the team. And it depends on how deep the dive is. But it just depends. That's a difficult question to answer.
Okay.
Without.
I was just wondering, as a coach, when you go into these companies, if you notice that. Because a lot of companies, people are just oblivious. They're just turning people over. And what they don't realize is when someone leaves, they go and talk. And the company is getting all these labels, but they continue in the same cycles of the same things. So I was just wondering if, when you come in and you notice that, if you feel free to address it, or you just go in and coach and leave.
It all depends.
Okay.
It depends on the case. So, I mean, there are now feedback loops for former employees that will now, I won't say the names of the companies, but they'll actually have like the equivalent of Yelp reviews, and they'll say, this is my experience at the company, and this working for this person was like this. This was very encouraging, or this person was a divisive environment. So in those cases, I can present those and say, look, this is what your former employees think of your company, and it's up to them whether they take that and they listen to it, because you can take a horse to water, but you can't
make it drink.
Right. You can't make it drink.
That's right.
But the best thing I can do is I can offer them the feedback and what that means as a business case, and that's sort of language that rests. You know, that's Silicon Valley speak. It works really well here, and at the extent of employee turnover and how, you know, reinvesting in employees as, you know, human capital being the most important asset over time is, you know, the business case becomes kind of like self-evident. Right. Yeah.
So I know you've lived in other parts of the world. I know you've spent a lot of time in Italy, and you could fill in the blanks of the rest of the countries. How do you compare your experiences? Did you work there? And if you did, how do you compare it to the work ethic here in the Silicon Valley?
Oh, wow. So I've lived in New York, I've lived in Frankfurt, I've lived in Sydney, I've lived in Rome, and I've lived in Los Angeles. And in terms of work environment, I would say this area has the highest concentration of pressure for productivity and performance.
Do you think it's because it's a Silicon Valley and it's where most of the innovation is, and where all the new cutting edge whatever is happening? Do you think that has something to do with it?
Yes, I also think the cost of living, well, that plays an important role, because, you know, if you've got a young family and house prices are a certain price, and you've got student loans to pay off, for example, then that focus to make sure that job is done properly it becomes a very sort of intense pressure for the person. So from my experience here, I would say this ecosystem more than any other is much more focused on performance and productivity, and it just means that the cost to the individual sometimes can be pretty overbearing.
Well, you're British and I have a British upbringing. So when I came to the United States to live, I was shocked when I found out that young people here begin their life in debt.
Yes, I was too, yeah.
I mean, what was your reaction to that bit of information?
Well, I actually wrote a report for Oxford University on this subject. So
you did?
Yeah, because I was so horrified.
So was I.
By the idea that you're in the most sort of vulnerable period of your life, right?
And
You're
you
entering
have debt.
adulthood, and you've come into a point where, how do I lay foundations for a secure future when you've got such a big responsibility as a huge debt to pay off? And I mean, I was looking at it and thinking, well, the consequences are that people take jobs that they otherwise may not necessarily take. And they may find themselves that the degree that they've taken, the knowledge that they've acquired from that degree, in some cases now becomes obsolete. So it doesn't become, there's actually the ROI is not there. And that's a huge challenge too. So yeah, I was fortunate in that I personally was fortunate, and I feel really bad for a lot of people that come out of college with a degree that may not be that valuable in 5 years,
But they owe a heck of a lot of money for a lot of time.
Absolutely, and technology is transforming, is moving so quickly. Who knows whether that, with AI, robotics, with virtual reality, with quantum computers, with quantum computing, with blockchain, for example, with all these different areas of innovation, what somebody learned 2 days ago or even a week ago is actually no longer relevant. So something that I do is I focus on coaching for critical thinking as well as empathy. So critical thinking is independent thinking. It doesn't matter whether the world is changing, it's just that the individual learns how to think critically rather than accept, say for example, news or media or agendas or even business reports which are given to them, so they can work out, okay, what do I want, what actually is this, do I trust this? If I do, can I verify it? And I think that critical thinking is actually is perhaps one of the most critical skills.
Well, one of the things you said that jumped out at me while you were speaking is I had the CEO of one of the AI companies on my show, and he said that we would all be equal. That even if you're smarter than I am or we're smarter than someone else, it wouldn't matter because computers will take all of our examinations for us. And so you won't really have to use your brain. And I asked him what would happen with the people who've gone to college and gotten whatever degrees. And he says they're going to have to relearn new skills. And when he said that, that's what I was thinking of, a young person graduating from college in debt, to be told that, hey, we don't need those skills anymore. We've got computers doing it for you.
Yeah.
You need to go learn something else while you're in debt. So, what do you feel about that whole concept?
I think horrified.
Yes,
I mean, it's a casualty, isn't it?
Yes.
That person then becomes a casualty not only because their previous education is no longer valuable, but the likelihood of them extending their debt. And let's face it, debt is something that, irrespective of what goes on in the media, in my opinion, this is a really big problem.
It is.
And it's much bigger than certain things that are going on with certain sports stars, or whether certain personalities have said certain things or they're doing certain things. Debt is actually really has a massive impact. I think it should be, in terms of a topic, agenda should be much, much higher than it is in the mainstream news, for example. And I think also the universities have a responsibility, rather than, some of them are private businesses, but they also have an ethical responsibility to the students, because those students are carrying their brand name. So.
Yes, but half of them can't find jobs. Could you imagine graduating in debt, with debt, and you don't have a way to start repaying it?
And then you've got another debt to take on because you've got to retrain. Yeah, that's.
So I think that's a problem.
I think
Do
it's a
you
massive
think
problem,
your coaching can help people prepare for this?
I think That's a good question. I've not really thought of that. Does my coaching help
So
them?
I just gave you a new avenue to add to what you're offering.
I think because you're right. I mean, well, yes and no. So I'd say yes in that critical thinking is critical thinking and learning EQ as an empathy building skills are two vital skills that are not taught at university. So critical thinking, independent thinking, working out for oneself as a mature adult and as a responsible individual, whether somebody's telling you the truth, or whether they're trying to convince you or persuade you to do something that may not necessarily be in your best interest.
Right.
So that skill set, I'd say that from what I coach, that's the most valuable skill I can impart on anyone. And empathy building, and emotional intelligence is also really important, because I think without working on empathy, our lives are sort of kind of quite barren places. You can work in the cube all day long and, you know, leave the cube a multi-billionaire, but then you're on your own.
Exactly.
Right? Without empathy, you don't have human contact. You don't have you don't belong to communities. Without community, it's a very sad place for any person to be, irrespective of how wealthy they are.
It's true.
When I lived in Bel Air, you know, I had clients in Bel Air, and I saw lots of very, very wealthy people, and some were very happy, and we were driven by purpose because they wanted to serve something like a bigger purpose rather than just themselves, and some hadn't. Some were really kind of like bankrupt. I don't mean physically bankrupt, financially bankrupt as a person.
And probably emotionally as well.
Very much so, yeah.
Which is the sad part. So the thing is, technology and innovation is happening so fast.
Yes.
Do you think the schools need to readjust their curriculums? Because last night I was reading an article and it says, do we really need to learn algebra? When do you use anything you've learned from algebra in your life? And I was thinking about that. Do you have an answer to that question?
I mean, I think as an education model, I think it's probably more likely that learning certain skill sets and competencies will be a lifelong process. I think the general misconception is if anybody believes I've learnt these skills, I don't need to learn anything anymore, that's my lot in life. I think that's a delusional person.
Of course.
We all need to continue learning, right? Life is a university. Irrespective of whatever age you are, there are things that come up, and to learn from those is what a responsible person will do.
Right.
So I think the continual learning is important. I think the debt is really the issue. I think that's the main thing, because you can continue to learn. You can learn to be teach yourself or work in a community. If you've got good empathy skills, you can be part of a community. The community helps that person learn, whether it's code, or whether it's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's HR, or whatever it is. You can learn these things from other people. So essentially, at the end of the day, we learn from each other.
Right.
Right. We also, the knowledge is derived from somebody else's thought somewhere along the line. So.
Well, we're down to less than 5 minutes. Can you believe it?
We are. Yeah, we are. Really?
We are.
I thought we just started.
No, we are. But before we wrap up, as a coach,
Yeah.
I know you're not a school coach, but you're a coach. What would you say to a young person who's about to enter into college? Do you have any advice you can offer to them?
About to enter into...
Someone who is about to go into the school system, that causes you to incur debt.
To incur debt.
What would you say to that person?
I would say the two things, you're going into to learn, and life is a university. It doesn't stop. So whatever knowledge that's acquired, it never stops at the second, once one has got the little piece of paper or the letters after.
But let me ask you a question, and this is a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
How much of what you learned back in your university life do you remember and do you use today?
The critical thinking, all the time.
Okay.
Certain aspects of knowledge. Some things I learned which are now irrelevant, and pointless. But the critical thinking and the way to build relationships with empathy, that's vital. That's helped me travel all over the world.
Okay, so we're down to 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
What haven't I asked you that you want to make sure you leave with anybody watching this show?
Well, I haven't. I don't know. I'm not even. I didn't think of that.
Okay, all right.
What
so as a
you
coach,
asked? What you haven't asked me?
Right, that you think people should know about what you do before we wrap. We have a very short period of time. The pressure is on.
I don't know.
Okay, so
I'm not sure.
let me ask you this question then.
Okay.
As a coach, and you're dealing with a lot of people, coaching them, you said, on empathy and
Yep.
also on their jobs.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you see a lot that you want to make sure you leave with people? That the one thing that you find you encounter a lot, regardless of the company.
It doesn't matter how good you are. I can make you better.
It doesn't matter.
Everyone has the ability to grow. Everybody.
And you feel that you can add value to their lives to make them make their life better.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because of your expertise.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you have to examine a person and get a feel for them because we're out of time, and then you address them accordingly. Is that how you operate?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Solve the problems and then look at where they need to grow and then chart a course and head towards that.
Thank you, Mark, so much. We're out of time. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to my wonderful crew. I love you guys. And thank you to my viewers. I hope that you have heard what Mark had to say. And if you need his help, write to the Jennylyn Show. And thank you for watching. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.